Welcome to the Conscious Combat Club, trauma-informed martial arts by women, for women. I'm your host Georgia, and I cannot wait to go on this journey with you. Please note that some listeners might find this content distressing. Take care, connect with your support networks, and refer to the organisations in the show notes below. Today's episode features Dr. Georgina Capone, or George as I've come to know her. George is a psychologist and a boxer who's brought her two worlds together to create the Warrior Women program, a trauma-informed boxing program for women in Devon in the UK. I know you can already tell from that intro that you're going to love this episode, and you will, but really quickly, before you get started, I want to bring your awareness to the 16 Days of Activism. 16 Days of Activism starts on November 25th and runs for 16 days until December 10th. And we will be running a number of events during the 16 days. So if you're not already either subscribed to our mailing list, which you can do via the Say Hi button on our website, or following us on Instagram, which is at consciouscombat.club, please go ahead and do that so you can get all the updates about the special events that we're going to be running. I know you're going to want to make sure you're up to date with those. In the meantime, I'll shut up and let's get into the episode. All right. So, Georgina, can you tell me about the Warrior Women program to start us?
I'm so excited to talk about the Warrior Women program. Yeah, so excited. So, where to start really? So I've just run the first class. The project is all about empowering women who've been through domestic violence to feel confident in their own body, to feel safe in their body, and to be able to set boundaries, to be able to say no. It's a kind of passion that's really, and something that's really close to my heart. And it's all about doing that through boxing, non-contact, basic boxing moves. And we're at the beginning of a journey, and it feels so exciting to know where it's going to go.
Can you describe your first class, both like how it went, but also what was the content of the session?
Yeah, so the first class was, so obviously it's in Bideford, I'm in North Devon, and I was running it with my colleague Leslie, who's there providing emotional support. So I'm there as coach, and we had some ladies come from Encompass, so that's a local charity that support vulnerable people, and within that, there are ladies accessing our project from their Brave Spaces project, and that's women who've experienced trauma and domestic violence. So we had 4 ladies from their charity, and they came, and the energy in the room was just amazing. Obviously, there was a lot of anxiety at the beginning. It's really scary, and I was really hope it feels kind of okay and not too cringy to say proud of these women who have been through such vulnerable, and difficult experiences, feeling so vulnerable coming to the class, but had come, and then not only had they come, and they were dealing with their anxiety, they were being so supportive of each other in the class. And I think that for me, that was one of the loveliest things to see these women who, without having to talk about their backgrounds, knowing that they've had those similar or, come from difficult experiences, and that kind of sense of kind of connection and understanding between them all. And that support was just a beautiful thing, really. So in the class, what we did in the first class and what we're doing throughout the 6 classes in the program is kind of basic boxing skills. So we start with a bit of a check-in. We did start a bit in the first session with thinking about kind of rules for the program as well, kind of a group agreement, we kind of called it, to think about how to keep and set the space and to feel safe. And the ladies actually came up with some really, really good things, actually. One of the things that I really liked, actually, which I think was really important for lots of the women, was not talking or focusing on people's bodies in the room or making comments about that. And I thought that was really important to talk about. So having that space to negotiate how we use this time together felt really important. And then we went on to jab, stance and guard, mixed with a bit of grounding for the rest of the session. But I think, to be honest, the ladies most of all, and what was a joy to see was just them smashing the crap out of the punch bags at the end. They were just absolutely ready to just go for it. So they've got their kind of stance, guard and jab down, and they were just wanted to go hard on the bags, and they definitely did. So I think they'd definitely like to do more of that, and it's very much a learning curve for me as I'm starting the program. I'm really lucky to have Leslie supporting me, because I've worked with Leslie in my NHS job. We've actually run groups together, and we've got a really good working relationship where we can give each other really good feedback. And personally, I really need that. This is a new program. It's really helpful to have someone objective there who can say, this was working, this wasn't working, let's try this next time. Because like I was saying before, I guess it's a bit of a journey, and it's an adventure, and it's really cool to just explore kind of what works in the space and what the ladies are finding most helpful, because there's all sorts of things that you could do in that space. Knowing how long to try the grounding exercises for people as well, it's all a bit of a balance, and you've got to work with what you've got in the room. But I think that was something that was most exciting for me in the class, actually. Quite anxiety provoking at the same time, because you've got to you don't know what's going to happen. You've got your lesson plan, but you've got to work with what's in the room. But I think that's what keeps it exciting and interesting, this kind of work.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that you have someone there not only to give you feedback, but also for support, right? Like the importance of being able to debrief as a facilitator in spaces like this is so critical. And I think something that we're very quick to overlook, because we don't think about how also we might be impacted as facilitators running these programs. And sessions vary a lot. Some sessions you walk away feeling like super uplifted and everyone smashed it and you're so proud. And then other sessions, like someone might have been having a bad day, or multiple people might have been having a bad day. Things can come up. Even just the energy in the room can be really heavy. And so thinking about how we can work through that as the facilitators is really important. And I think a big part of that is having a container for being able to debrief, whether that's a team that you refer back to, your own psychologist, other therapists that you work with. But I think the best case scenario is that there's another person there who's seen it firsthand. It's very easy then to talk about, oh, here's what I'm feeling around what happened. How are you feeling about that? And how can we, best look after ourselves to go into the next session next week, or however frequently you're running classes.
That is so true. And I wonder how much people prioritize that, because to be honest, when I was setting this up, I didn't really think so much about using that space for me, as well as thinking about the practical stuff of debriefing, planning what to do differently next time, actually the emotional impacts of running the class. And that's strange, because in my work I have to have clinical supervision as a psychologist. We have to, it's like our bread and butter. We have a minimum of an hour a month to process what we do. But actually it's just as important doing work like this, isn't it? And for me it makes sense that it's so important. And I remember talking to one of the coaches at the Shape Your Life program on Zoom over in Canada, when they were giving me a bit of advice when I was networking, trying to think, how on earth do I go about setting up a project like this? And she was saying the value of having that space to debrief after about what was going on in the room, kind of how were people feeling, what does that say about what they need, how do we support them next time, or what was going on for us, what was difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that can come in many forms as well too. Like I say, we won't always have access to a second facilitator depending on the situation. Just knowing who you can call within your team and say hey, do you have space at the moment for me to just share what I'm feeling? And then talking through that with somebody is so, so valuable. I'm curious as well as to some of your insights. You've got a particularly unique lens, I think, having come through psychology, and particularly psychology through the NHS, which my understanding is kind of that is through hospitals. Is that right? I really don't know enough about the UK health system.
In terms of kind of the training that you go through.
kind of work that you do? Like, you seeing clients in hospitals? Is it outpatients? Is it like just working in a clinic?
So you can work in all sorts of services, basically. There's different types of like psychologists. So I trained as a clinical psychologist, and you get training placements with children, with adults, in learning disability services. So you could literally work in all kinds of services, really, all the way up along the lifespan from children to older adult. I've chosen to work in adult services. I started off working in specialist forensic adult services. So that's for people who've committed offences that are deemed to be linked to mental health difficulties. So I started off in, I had my specialist placement in a criminal, oh God, what was it called? It's a long name. Criminal Justice Liaison Diversion Service. And that was, getting people that are kind of regularly committing offences and trying to steer them out of the justice system, giving them that earlier intervention with mental health impact. That was really interesting. My first job then was in a low secure hospital, forensic hospital. I did quite a bit of inpatient work. I did a good couple of years before I then went into adult mental health in the community, and that's where I am now. I had a bit of a journey, but I've stuck with adult. And I think for me, when I was in hospital, there's things that I really miss about the hospital work. There was that real sense of community and connection, which I think, links me back to like the coaching and the groups. There's something really nice for all of us as humans. We need that kind of sense of like community and connection. And you get that with a team that you work in a hospital. You go through so much together, you support each other. There's a very heavy impact at times, the emotional impact of the work, like we were talking about earlier. But there was also a stagnancy, I think particularly working in forensic services. There was a lot of pathology around mental health difficulties, and I was starting to realise how much it was grating on me and jarring me with it just not fitting with my values. And as I started to kind of build my experience and have time as a psychologist, I guess I'm only just really starting to understand the kind of psychologist I want to be, and who I am and how that fits with my values. And this has been my journey through into movement, actually, where for me, movement has always been a really big part of my life. It's something I'm really passionate about. I think movement in all forms, to kind of gymming it up, fitness, to dance, to theatre, has so much to offer in terms of how we kind of process feelings and how we feel good about ourselves. And so I started kind of gradually leaning more and more towards that kind of in my work. And I've gone from being a very kind of cognitive psychologist and kind of very much kind of working cognitively, intellectually with people, to being really interested in working emotionally and with the body. And it's taken me all the way on this twists and turns in my journey to boxing. And I finally feel like I'm getting to the place where that feels kind of genuine for me. Because what I really like, I think what I'm trying to say is what I really like about the movement stuff and how it sits so differently with how mental health is kind of understood in, like, back in the day when I was in forensic services, is it's all about the nervous system, isn't it? And that, for me, that just makes so much sense. Like, it's backed up by science, and it is really empowering for people, the whole narrative and story around how we think about mental health well-being or mental health difficulties with movement. It's all about the body and the nervous system having very natural but difficult responses at times to stress. And while that's difficult for people, there are ways to empower them and support themselves to use their body to move through those difficult reactions and take control back, I guess. And when we feel more in control, we feel safe, right? Whereas I think what I was really noticing, it was really difficult for me, because I do care a lot. I guess that's why I'm in this job. Working in hospitals and seeing people so disempowered by these labels at times. Diagnosis, don't get me wrong, has a place, but sometimes the way that they were used, particularly in forensic institutions, it was almost like a label to say, this person will never get better. And sometimes people would internalize those labels. You've got labels like treatment resistant psychosis or something when medication won't work for someone. And I think it's that I love how movement and the kind of recovery kind of story around it that is so much more empowering gives people their power back, I guess. and starts to put it back into their hands rather than in mental health services hands or professionals hands, which can be really disempowering for people.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, like the whole all of that, but I went on a
I loved that tangent. I loved that tangent. And there's so many like little pieces of that I want to highlight. But I think like the really important underpinning, right, is that a lot of people just don't have emotion regulation skills, right? And that manifests in lots of different ways. And the way that we learn skills can be impacted by our experiences significantly, right? So when we think about trauma, we think about the myriad of ways that that shows up in people's lives in the way that it can disrupt their ability to regulate their nervous system and to regulate their emotions. And we might, in some settings, then call that symptoms and try and cluster them, you know, based on statistics or whatever we're basing it on, as in the DSM. But, you know, a cluster of symptoms that we then say, oh, okay, this person has this condition. And like you say, that either means they're pigeonholed into a box, they're going to be told you're going to need this medication for the rest of your life, you're going to, you know, need treatment for the rest of your life, you're always going to live with this, or just them thinking that there's a problem with them and not actually giving them the autonomy and the power to be able to change it. Like I'm all for diagnoses and finding out what's wrong if that then gives us something that we can do about it. You know, like if I know that somebody has a genetic condition, or I'm not a doctor, but you know, if we knew that somebody had a specific genetic condition which led to, you know, a gene being expressed in a certain way that we could treat with the medication, we'd be really happy to have that diagnosis, because it means, oh, okay, now we know which medication is going to help that person to live a significantly better quality of life. It might be, okay, we've diagnosed this person as having diabetes, we're going to take diet and exercise interventions now to help them control their blood sugars. We now have a pathway to what we're going to do next. And sometimes when we have a diagnosis, that can lead people to a pathway to what to do next. And I know that there are loads of different treatments that work, particularly when there's a really strong client and practitioner relationship and trust. And when you get a significant buy-in from the person who really believes that this type of therapeutic model is going to work for them, then there can be value in it. But when we're diagnosing for diagnosis' sake and we don't have an action plan, that's really problematic. And I love that there are so many people like you who are very action oriented, right? I'm super action oriented. My question is always, well, so what? Like, if you're telling me this, then so what? Like, so what does that tell us that's going to be helpful? What action are we then going to take as a result of that? If we don't have an answer to that, then maybe we need to come back a couple of steps and say, okay, well, where else can we think that we can take action that's going to make a meaningful impact in this person's life? Because that's the whole point.
It's living with, living with, you know, what you've got, the bodies that we have, and how to do that, I guess, like in the best way for us. But I think, as always, and I totally agree with what you're saying, it's the so what, isn't it? Okay, so if I'm gonna understand my difficulties this way, how is this going to help me? And for me, it's the key is that what would give that person a helpful understanding that empowers them to be able to do something with what they've got, how to work with the difficulties, not just the difficulties, and using the strengths that they've got as well to work with those difficulties. I think sometimes we don't always highlight enough about what is working well for people, what strengths do you come with, what resources do you have, because people generally have a lot, but by the time they come into mental health services, or at least NHS mental health services, things will have had to have been pretty bad for a long time. So people have lost sight of the good times and the strengths that they have, or the person that they used to be. So for me, what I try and do, and it's very much in line with kind of, I guess, my values and how I work, is not invalidating people's distress or, like, you know, their feelings, far from it, but also getting a balance of, you know, what do you bring to the table outside of your diagnosis? You know, tell me about who else you are as a person.
Yes, I love that. And I mean, the fact that that person is alive and seeing you today means they've got some significant skills, right? whatever you've done has helped you get to this point that you're at now. And we think about things like dissociation, like hypervigilance, you know, all of these could be really seen as skills that have been super, super protective. Whether it was at a particular point in that person's life, or for several points, or for a time period, nothing is so black and white as to say that's disruptive and this is a positive thing as well too. In different contexts, skills have different meaning, and so obviously your body's super adaptive, otherwise it wouldn't have changed in all of these ways that it did initially to protect you.
Right. And how amazing is that the body does all of these things. And I think for me, and I could go on a big rant about this, so I won't, but I am becoming more and more aware of how much our lives and the way that we live is driving us crazy. But who's talking about that? You know, where's capitalism in the DSM? Can we diagnose the way we're living rather than the people and the expectations we have of people in this world, and what that's doing? You know, there's this guy I follow on Instagram called Mark Walsh. Don't know if you've looked at him. Oh, I love him. He's brilliant. I like him. He just says it how it is. And he put this post up the other day about, you know, oh, I feel crap. Why is that? Well, how about we look at how we're living? And yeah, it's so true. And I forgot where I was going with that. But there's just something about just taking that wider lens of let's think about how we're living, and also take power back in that way where we can, with changing things. Like for me, this big move that I made, which some of my friends I think thought was probably a bit crazy, like moving from a city to North Devon, which is like totally rural, but it's by the sea. But for me, it was a big part of my mental well-being and changing my life to slow down and get out of the rat race and the hamster wheel, because I don't think we always recognize or think about that with mental health, and definitely not enough in mental health services. And a big thing behind the Warrior Women project as well was through going through my own therapy, which I personally believe is it's helped me grow so much, but also made me a better psychologist as well. I feel like if you're gonna therapy other people, you've really got to have your own therapy. I'm a big believer in that. But I became so aware of society in terms of kind of gender kind of socialization, male and female roles, and what an influence that can play kind of in terms of mental health difficulties, but particularly mental health difficulties for women, and the trauma they can be vulnerable to experiencing, and men in a similar but very different way. You know, there's all this toxic masculinity stuff too, isn't there? But for me, thinking particularly for women, you know, how difficult it can be to be assertive, and if you are assertive, how people feel about that. And it feels like, you know, you're in sometimes as a woman, you can be stuck between a rock and a hard place where, you know, if you're passive, well, you're not really speaking up for yourself. But if you're assertive, then you're being bossy, or you're too emotional. I think treading that line is still really difficult.
Absolutely. And like you say, right, boxing and I think lots of movement-based programs, in particular martial arts programs, we're biased, shocker for nobody listening to this podcast, are really powerful in that space, because we're not just telling people, you know, be assertive, stand up for yourself, and if someone calls you bossy, ignore it, because that, again, is just like such an easy thing to say and such a harder thing to do when you've got no experiences of having done that ever, right? And the situations where we're telling people, here is when, you know, you might like to stand up for yourself, is like at work, to your boss, to your family, like to the people where we are so vulnerable. These people have power and control. They have the capacity to, you know, take away our livelihoods, take away our connection. You know, they are like the most terrifying people to practice setting boundaries and being assertive to. And yet that's what we tell people to go ahead and do when they've got no physical practice, no embodied practice of ever having done that. And I think what can be really difficult as well, when you've had very difficult experiences where you've asserted yourself in the past,
and that's not been received very well, how triggering it can be when you start to assert yourself again, and the kind of emotional backlash that you can get from that, even if no one says anything, like the guilt, and I guess the inner critic for a lot of us, like ramping up, like, oh, you did something wrong there. And yeah, so preparing people for that, it's a process, isn't it? It's not oh right, I've learned what to say, so I'll just go around and say it now because I've learned assertive language. It's okay, well, how do I emotionally deal with this when I'm setting boundaries? How do I deal with other people's emotions and my own?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like akin to being like, oh, I've watched The Karate Kid, I'm gonna go step in the ring.
yeah, exactly.
Let's touch back to you a bit now. So when did you get into boxing? What brought you into boxing, and what was that experience like for you?
Oh wow. So the first time I boxed was and I think I only went once, and I did really enjoy it, but I was just too shy. I went when I was a teenager, I think, and I really wish that I'd stuck at it. This was back when I was in Nottingham. And I did think at the time, oh, like I think I could get a lot out of this, but I was just too shy. And I'd always had a lot of anger as a child. And because of my mum and dad kind of have gone through a divorce and everything, my dad had his own stuff going on. He was actually quite abusive. And I had a lot of unexpressed anger that I wasn't aware of as a child. And it was all coming out. So I wish I'd have kind of stuck at that boxing. I kind of had my own journey with it, carried on with life, kind of put my head down, got into training, got into being a psychologist, and was so focused on other people and other people's difficulties, I kind of left all of my stuff behind. Fast forward, moved to North Devon, ended up going through a breakup, which you know these things happen, and we sadly weren't right for each other. And I had a bit of space, I guess, for the first time in ages to really focus on me. I don't know how or why. Like I'd been looking at martial arts stuff for a while since I'd been down here, and I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to try boxing. Went to a local boxing class. Ended up knowing a couple of people from my local gym that were there. We ended up having a laugh, and then I carried on. A couple of weeks later, they were training people for the charity fight early next year. And I got roped into doing it, didn't I? So, you know, not only had I just started like messing around at boxing, oh no, all of a sudden I'm going to be fighting. So within a few months, and I was really focused. And I guess through the breakup and all the stuff that I was processing, it gave me a real focus, and not just a focus, but a group and community of really caring, supportive people. There's something about just being around good energy, I think sometimes, isn't there? Like I do sound more and more hippie since I moved down here, but it is so true. You feel it when you're around good energy. And whenever I've been in kind of fitness kind of classes and stuff, it just charges me back up. And boxing was exactly the same. So it gave me that focus, that discipline, that connection I just really needed at the time, because I've moved down here. I've met people and I've made some friends, but not like my close connections back home. And I just got into it. And I remember the first time that I punched one of the pads, and this release that started happening in my body, like I was just shaking. But it wasn't oh, I'm really scared shaking. It was oh, I'm feeling powerful, like shaking. And it was like coursing through my body. Something had woken up as the only way that I could kind of use words to kind of describe it. And it makes me think of that. Is it Peter Levine? Like I sound like I'm name dropping, but it just really makes me think of his book Awaking the Tiger or something. It did. I can see why he named it that, because it did feel like that in my body. And then I realized, like, oh, I need to keep doing this. Actually, I think this is really important for me. And one of the things that I noticed the more I was doing it, I noticed like how much more confident I was in other areas of my life, and not just in classes, like at work. I was asserting myself more. I was taking up more space in meetings. I was disagreeing with people, and that was really different. I was being me. I was starting to be more genuine, and I feel like I had kind of just woken up. It was really, really strange, but I liked it. I liked it a lot, and I thought I just need more of this in my life. And I think what boxing really allowed me to do which I'd kind of got there, this is really interesting, like going through this process as a psychologist. My therapy helped me intellectually understand what I needed to do. And we did do some like experiential emotion focused work, and that was all helpful. But I think what I really needed to do was find a practice that helped me do that and work through that with my body. And boxing really allowed me to connect with the anger that I had suppressed, that stopped me from being me. And it was kind of like the lock and the key. Like I'd found the key, and then I just went with it. So now I try and get to boxing most weeks. After the charity fight, I did have a bit of time off. I did another sparring match with some amazing ladies at a local gym, and realised that I didn't want to spar anymore because I got lucky with my charity fight because I've got long arms, and that was enough for me. I just needed to do one spar session, and that was fine. But it was more about kind of just the movement that felt so empowering. I thought it's really good for me. And it just made me think, after all the kind of stuff it had given me, I thought, I want to share this with other people. Like, I feel like this is what I need to do. I'd had a bit of life coaching with this amazing yoga teacher down here, Fiona Law. I was at a timeline of my life, and I was just kind of at a place where I was thinking, what do I want to do? I don't even know if I want to be a psychologist anymore. And then boxing gave me this kind of pathway to think about how I could join the two. And still enjoy my job and not have to feel like I've thrown away 10 years of my life doing all this training to be a psychologist. I can make it work for me. I can be me in my job. Fancy that?
What? What? Absolutely not.
Yeah, so boxing gave me permission to be me, to show up. And I think it was about the movement, but there was something so lovely and powerful about the movement, and also being around a group of people that encouraged me to do that. Like, it's that double whammy, I think, of like using your body, being able to be expressive, but having people that around you that want you to do that and encouraging you to do that. Both of those things were really powerful, and which led me to, randomly within a year, this all happened, trained to be a boxing coach. In just basic non-contact boxing skills, and use that to set up a program to empower women. My friend Leslie, who I talked about earlier, a colleague of mine, linked me up with the women's charity Encompass that she used to work with previously. They were really interested in the idea, and it just took off from there. And I just can't believe how it has taken off. But I think the speed and the momentum of kind of what's going on and how good it feels can only be a sign that this is right. And I think, when I think about all the stuff I've been doing, it is a lot of work, but it doesn't feel like that. And when you enjoy something, you're on the right track, when it doesn't feel like a chore, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to hover quickly over this idea around, I guess, doing work in psychology and intellectually understanding, be like, how you're processing emotions, everything that's going on, and bringing that into the martial arts space. Because I think, and this is quite complex, and it's not super binary either. Like, it's not so black and white as to say one is good and one is bad. But one comment that I do get a bit is around the idea that, well, martial arts is escapism, right? And I think that can be really true in certain cases. For example, we just saw a lot in the media, Alexander Volkanovski, who's a UFC champion, and he just took a fight, and he was talking about how badly for his mental health he needed to be taking a fight, and when he doesn't have a fight, he's not okay, right? And I know he's a sports psychologist, and I don't want to distance diagnose him. He's just an example that I would give, and we've had so many examples of people who say that, unless they've got their training, then they're not okay. And one thing that was really shocking to me was when my psychologist first said that, like, you're not actually processing your emotions when you use exercise as a way to escape from what's happening. And that can be super powerful depending on what's going on. Sometimes you do just need an escape, and escaping via scrolling social media versus escaping via going and doing a martial arts class, I also think are very different things. But again, there's another level to that, which is when you're not just escaping, you're actually experiencing an embodied process of releasing anger or engaging with your body, being present in your body, practicing grounding skills, setting boundaries, like that again is something that I think is at another level, right? It's even more different to already, I think there is benefit to escapism, but again, what happens when you can't escape? What happens when you retire? What happens when you get injured? What happens when you get older and your training has to wind down? How do you then cope with that? Mm-hmm. And that's why the trauma-informed aspect of the trauma-informed martial arts is important too, because we're not just saying we're going to try and not do harm, but get you into the space where you can do escapism. There's also themes that we're threading through that, whether that is being assertive, setting boundaries, being in your body, experiencing your body as something other than an object to change, like all of these things that have, I think, really strong impacts on people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the question for me was, you were saying about
whether how you got into boxing, what you liked about it, which I think we covered off on. I think you kind of answered all of my question. I was just got so lost in your answer that I've almost already forgotten what I was asking you as well.
But I think what you said was really important about, you were making me think about that balance between distraction and sitting with your feelings. It's a fine line, isn't it? And it's something I've had to really manage myself. It can be sneaky. Distraction. You think you're doing something good for yourself, and then you think, oh no, I'm too busy again. I'm not feeling.
Too busy again. So me, yes.
Slow down.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult, isn't it? Because, and I guess for me, I've been trying to find that balance. And I think in a way, like when I launched myself into boxing to process the breakup and everything that was going on, it was a welcome bit of distraction. And there was something that I kind of needed about it at that time. And I think distraction is good, right? It's just how often it happens, isn't it? And I always think as well, like it's always the intention you bring to something, isn't it? You could literally use anything as a distraction if you wanted to. And linking back to what you're saying about trauma-informed martial arts, the intention behind the class is different to what it might be if you were training for a fight in your standard, your mainstream boxing gym. The intention behind your practice is very different, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so many variations on what that can look like as well too. And again, like I'm not trying to say this like a right and a wrong is a binary good, bad. I think it is important to have an awareness of that so that we don't mindlessly slip into numbing and distraction. Especially because like fighting is a great example, right? Where for some people, that is what it is I want to always have something that I'm preparing for 10 weeks to prepare for this event. And that becomes the whole center of my world. Everything that I do, eating, sleeping, seeing people, training, recovering, 100% of my time becomes dedicated to that. And then I won't have to deal with anything else. And then once I finish that one, I want to recover, and then I want to go on to the next one so that I always have something in the forwards that in the future that I'm looking forward to that then can consume everything. And it's so sneaky too, because it's not insignificant to take a fight. Like it's scary. You're going into the ring, you're going to get potentially injured. You're doing a sport where the other person is trying to hurt you. And so it spikes a lot of adrenaline. It really does pull your brain in a way where it's not just that it's like, oh, I have a deadline for this work thing or this assignment or whatever, which is also like stressful as well in its own way. But there's a very specific flavor to it that is all encompassing. And at the end of the day, what do you do when you don't have that anymore? And I think certain people, like I've been in that mode at certain points of my life as well too, where it's very easy to blank out everything else to focus on this one thing. But we're whole people and we have so many different versions of ourselves that we want to keep working within. And by all means, like, fighting can be your whole life if that's what you really want. But I think if you ask most people, like, would you really want for being a fighter to be your only identity once you're 50 and you can't fight anymore. You can't do it, but it's your only identity. Do you think you'll be fulfilled and happy? It's
Yeah.
a leading question, but it's really interesting to talk about.
What you're saying is really making me think, Georgia. It's so interesting. And I think in a way I can relate a bit, you know, I'm not saying it's the same thing for fighters, but I invested 10 years roundabout training to be a psychologist. And for me, I know other people have been through the same journey. I think because you have to be so dedicated, you can be really vulnerable to making it your whole life, your whole identity. And I did. And I think for a long time, up until very recently, my job has meant far too much to me. Like, it has been me. It's like my identity. And in a way, it's had to have been for me to get through that training. But what's been really important for me, and I'm still on a journey with it, is thinking about who I am outside of it, which, you know, the coaching is a massive part of that. But not being so driven by like achievement anymore, thinking about my other needs. I am trying, and I'm a work in progress, to slow down a bit more, be outside more, spend more time and be present with my friends and my family, rather than just being like drive. And I love being busy. I am passionate. I have a lot of energy, so I will always err towards that side. But I think what kind of anchors me more now is having that time and that connection, like outside, but also to the people that really matter to me. Just being present, because life's so short, isn't it? And as we get older, you know, friends have families. It's so hard to have that time together, and it just makes me really value it and want to have those times and those opportunities to do that. And when you're so busy and you're filling your time, it's so easy to let that slide. You're kind of like neglecting yourself a bit, aren't you? I think it can be so easy, back to the way that we live, it can be very easy to neglect ourselves. The society that we live in rewards us so much for achievement and tries to say that we are only meaningful human beings if we're achieving something, when actually we can just be. It's still very uncomfortable for me to say that, actually, but I'm working on it. And rest is just so important.
Yes. I just want to just like pause to let that sink in for everybody. It's probably not a new concept to anyone. More maybe it is. And if it is, then like, welcome to this podcast. We're basically all on this journey of trying to be, you know, human beings instead of human doings. Now, your journey, let's come back to it. We're talking about you got into boxing, you started to design a program. I'd be amiss if I didn't invite you to talk about the experience of working with us in the Conscious Teacher Training, or the Conscious Coaching course that we ran here at the Conscious Combat Club. So what was that experience like? How did that influence your program design? Can you speak a bit to it?
Yeah. I feel like I couldn't really have done it without it. I needed that support. Coming to this as a psychologist, you know, I go to the gym a lot, but I've never run a fitness class. And moving over to thinking in that way, I needed that kind of support and step-by-step process, which I feel like the program gave me. And I think, you know, I kind of got the whole trauma-informed kind of principles, because we kind of do that at work. It's our bread and butter. But translating it into a martial arts environment and thinking about what that looks like was really helpful and important. Like, even down to, you know, I use grounding strategies at work, but thinking about what would work with people in that kind of class and how you deliver it, because how you deliver it in that kind of environment is probably quite different to like how you're delivering it in more of like a formal therapy setting. And I think as well, it's probably just that confidence and reassurance of being able to see how someone else has run something like this successfully. I think I really got a lot from the lesson planning in particular, because for me, it was that practical thing about just not knowing really where to start with content of planning, like my boxing sessions. I'd obviously done my coaching, training and assessment, but that was standard coaching. It wasn't right, how do I then apply this in a trauma-informed way? So it was so helpful to have that space, not just from the teaching side of it, but also the community attached to it. which I often forget to kind of post in when I'm asking questions. But when I do, and people have put some helpful stuff on there, I'm sharing resources and how you would deal with particular issues coming up. But I think, the lesson planning was really helpful. And thinking about how to introduce kind of a bit of fun into the sessions as well, because I think the last thing I wanted was it to end up feeling quite serious and dry. And wanting to have that variety within the classes as well, different exercises, whether it's kind of grounding or the kind of mixing between the cardio and the grounding in like the second half of the session after you've taught some skills in the first half. It just gave me that nice kind of structure, really, and confidence to think, okay, I can go into a class and I've got a bit of an idea about what I can do, and that makes me feel confident and reassured enough to give it a go, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was so helpful. And the last session that I haven't yet watched is the referral one, which I am looking forward to watching as well, because now I'll be hopefully in the future expanding. I would love to, and stepping out of the current funding I'm being lucky enough to be given by Encompass for their ladies. I would be looking forward to thinking about how to work with and find other referral networks to expand as well, because there's the coaching side, there's the trauma informed kind of, and applying that to the martial arts and the coaching, and then there's the business side. So like 3 different sets of skills, really, and I think that is a lot to kind of get your head around when you're setting up a course like this. So just having that really thought through step-by-step process with the modules was really helpful in being able to take the project from an idea into like an actual reality. And actually all the business stuff in your slides as well has been really helpful. With things like thinking about, okay, how am I going to write a summary that I can send to referrers and also give to potential clients, my leaflet and stuff like that. Really hard to whittle down and think about content. But all of that was really, really helpful too.
Awesome. And it comes back to what we said at the start, right, about being like, so what? And that was the thing that I found frustrating in doing other trauma-informed movement programs. So I was like, yes, this information's awesome. It's really resonating. Like, I love it. I'm learning so much. But I don't know how to get from that to implementing it in a program. Like, actually tell me the specifics of, duration, repetitions, program design, all of the decisions that I'm actually going to need to make. And when it comes from being like this intellectual concept into something that's very tangible, and when you don't have a space to think about what are the decisions that I want to make, as in like, okay, how many people, how long is the program going to run for? Is it going to be a 6-week course? Is it going to be an ongoing course? What type of business model do I want to use? What's appropriate to the type of population that I'm working with? Who else do I need to bring into the space? Like, all of these questions are really important, and I think can get missed in this space where we're so great at talking about like, okay, what is safety? What does that mean? Why is it important for trauma survivors? What are all of the different factors that influence people? How does their socioeconomic status, and how does race, and how does gender, and how does all of that intersect into creating somebody's experience? But I think it can become all very wishy-washy. And that's one of my favorite things about our team, is that some of our team are so great at that part. And I'm very like, okay, but so what? Like, what does that actually mean for us then as practitioners? Or I'll be like, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is this. If I translate that into something practical, am I going to change my program by doing 1, 2, 3, 4 things? Yes or no? Or let's have a conversation about that, because I think you can get so stumped by like analysis paralysis and just like, oh, which step do I take next? Because like you said, as someone starting a program, you are starting a business, you're facilitating, you're doing program design. There's so much in that, and it is very scary thinking that you might drop the ball on something as well too, and then let somebody down. I know that's something that really like eats away at me, is thinking about, you know, as the programs grow, do I have the systems in place to be able to look after everybody and make sure that we don't forget about people and drop them through the cracks? Because at the end of the day, if we're running trauma-informed programs, we're working with vulnerable people. So I feel like the onus, the responsibility is even stronger than it would be if we were working with general population, or if we weren't making promises to be trauma-informed. I think that's something that really can't be taken lightly. And like, I love your program that you've designed. It's so great. All of the things that you're doing are so really thoughtful and truly trauma-informed. And obviously I'm biased because I know you're using our model in a lot of that, but I have seen more lately of people using the terms trauma-informed, and what they mean by that is they have lived experience. And that is important, and it's so valuable. And I think that, you know, nothing about us without us it should be a really core tenet to all the work that we do, but it's not enough on its own, because your experience is not going to be everybody else's experience. And then I'm seeing outwardly things that I will like flinch, like genuinely recoil, because you've added the label trauma-informed, and you didn't have to. You could have just said, you know, I'm someone who's been through this and I'm here teaching martial arts. But because you're trauma-informed, you really do have a strong, I think, onus of responsibility. And I do look forward to seeing what happens in the next sort of 5 years or so with collaborations, particularly between Australia, the UK and the US, around what, and Canada, I would say, are the really big players, but there's always people popping up in other places as well too, about what that really looks like, and getting more international recognition around
regulation. Yeah,
because anyone can say they're trauma-informed at the moment, unfortunately.
And I guess, isn't it, it's like, well, what does that mean to people? And if someone said it to me, trying to put my psychology experience aside, I'd be thinking, oh, I'm going to feel safe here. Someone's going to be like considering me. And yeah, I think it's really important as a facilitator to think about what you're opening up to when you say trauma-informed, being clear about what you're offering, I guess, and what you want. And what you're going to need to make space for and support in your classes, like, and asking yourself that question: are you ready for that? Like, do you want that? What's your emotional reaction going to be? Going back to what we said earlier, how are you going to look after yourself?
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about that, and I've spoken about that with people who, I mean, a common reason why someone will want to start a trauma-informed program is because of their experiences, because of their lived experience, right? And there's no perfect timeline, and I don't think there's like a measure of being like, well, now you're healed enough to be ready to take, you know, to work with other people. But the general measure is that, do you get swept in when somebody is emotionally overwhelmed? And I think, you know, particularly I work with a lot of women who want to step into the coaching space. And for a lot of women, their experiences and part of their coping strategies are to appease. And so we've really struggled to be able to sit with somebody's discomfort in a class. And when you're working with a group of people, if that happens and one person's uncomfortable, you're going to be really distracted by that one person's discomfort. And they might even be like, this is how I am. Few times a month, once a month, I just get really down, and just like, you know, it's nobody's fault. That's just like the way my mental health is. And, you know, like that might be the whole narrative that's going with them, or any number of things. But if you can't stay centered enough to also be aware of everybody else, and to pull the energy upwards, if that's pulling the energy down, and there's lots of little things like that, you just need to have a lot of presence to be able to do that. And really, like I say a lot, right, the hallmark of trauma is not being able to be present, is either predicting what might happen in the future or being stuck in the past. And so if clients are able to pull you into predicting what might go further wrong, or being stuck in what's happened to you in the past, then you're not present for the people that you're working with. You might need a second facilitator or some more time.
I like what you said about like being present, and having a presence to kind of lift up the energy in the room, right? Yeah, just thinking about that. and how you do that as a facilitator. Because I was thinking about my experience in my first session. It's quite strange. I started to embody what I felt like I used to embody when I used to perform, like dancing a bit. I say perform, like I was no like professional, but like I did like a few performances, and my body would go into some different zone, which was a helpful zone, like, but it felt like I had a presence. And that kind of makes sense, because it's, I guess for me, it's about energy, isn't it? It's about using your energy and that presence to balance what's going on in the room. And what I really notice and how I use mine, and I guess that we're all individual, aren't we, is body. I'm doing this with my arms and my hands. I guess it's like expressing, isn't it? And voice. I think voice and like the tone is like a big one, isn't there? And volume.
Yep. All of those things, right? Because sometimes you're going to need to bring the energy up in the room. Sometimes you need to bring the energy down. They're all examples of co-regulating. And it really is like dominoes as well too. Like the more practiced you get at this, the better that you get. I'm by no means perfect, but in general, in some situations, I will lean on maybe the client in the class who is in a state at that moment that's closest to where would be productive for us to continue learning. If the energy has dropped and this person maybe seems like, you can feel this person's going to be quite receptive if I invite them to demonstrate a kick that I know that they're particularly good at, and that can sometimes bring the energy up. Or sometimes it might go the other way. You might pick the person in the room who's struggling the most, and you might again lean on one of their strengths, pivot the class towards that, and help bring bring the class up by helping them express their power. It might be that, for example, let's say you've been learning how to do hooks in the class, and hooks are often like somewhat difficult for people to get their head around because it's got a big foot pivot, hand movement, like the distancing away from your body can be tricky for people to work out. There's lots of like components to it, as opposed to a cross, which I think a lot of people pick up pretty quickly. And so you might switch gears and go back to something that's more within people's strengths and how uplift them from there. And then you might, build in a combination that's got a hook. And you really do just get practice at doing that when you can feel in the class where, and sometimes as a facilitator too, it's difficult for us to always know how things are going to land. So sometimes I'll be like, all right, everyone, I've got a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. Let's just like preface it with that. But I think you're up for it. At any point, if you want to regress it, we can regress it. But honestly, I think this is going to look harder than it really is. Like, are you willing to give it a try? Yes, they are. And sometimes it totally backfires. Like sometimes people get super flustered. They can't get out of the flustered state. And I'm like, I have progressed them too quickly. It's just like being an exercise scientist and working with a client where you increase their weight before they're ready for it, and not necessarily going to say to the client like, oh, I really messed up here and like I didn't periodize properly and we're going to deload next week because I mucked up. You might, but typically you just be like, okay, like they're going to be a bit extra sore for a couple of days in terms of their muscles, no permanent damage, but like then we're going to regress. Not in a bad way, but we're just going to strip some weight back off and build it back up from there. And it's the same thing with like martial arts classes, where you do get a lot better over time at reading the room, knowing what everybody's got in their toolkit, where they're at, how you can increase things so that they feel accomplished. Because I find that at the end of the class, one of the most common positives people will share about what went well is when they learned a new thing. I really liked learning this new thing, or I was really good at doing, this combination was hard, but I did it. Having something that's just out of reach and then being able to achieve that is really powerful for people. If you're just always repeating things that are within their comfort zone, at a certain point, they're going to be like, I don't really feel like I'm improving. I'm a bit meh about it. They might not be, but they definitely can be. So that, I think, is the art side of being a facilitator, is feeling the energy in the room, helping everybody co-regulate, whether they need to co-regulate up or down, and it does vary.
I'm yoinking that. I'm sealing it. I like it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Please. I am mindful of our time. I just want to circle back to anger. I think anger is such a central part to the work that we do, particularly when we run women's programs, right? One of the really commonly cited reasons why women will reach out to me, and I know connect with martial arts, is they're like, I have anger. I want to release that anger. What do you think about that, and how can we work with that?
Oh, what a question, Georgia. I like it. I get really excited when women talk about their anger, actually. I think anger is great. I think it gives us so much. I think it's such an important emotion. I think in British culture, we definitely try and like suppress it. We're not the most expressive as a culture. Half my heritage is Italian. My dad's Italian. So I've grown up with quite like different experiences, I guess, in a way of like, how expressive one side of my family have been. Arguing 1 minute and then absolutely fine the next. To the opposite on the other side. But I think anger is so important, and particularly for women. Going back and circling back to what I was talking about earlier about how women are socialized, which I've always had an interest in. I think a big, not obviously all of it, but a big part of difficulties with women's mental well-being and their mental health difficulties is suppressed emotion. One of the big emotions being anger. Because as women, one of the main roles that we've been given and been socialized and rewarded and kind of reinforced for doing is nurturing. And anger isn't seen as part of that. Anger it's not seen as having a home there. Be a nice girl, be a good girl. And it's like our anger just has no place or say in that. So when women are having a conversation about their anger and wanting to do something with it, gets me excited because I think, oh, okay, you want to do something with this. You don't want to shove this down. You've noticed you've got this. You want to get it out. And for me, that's a really exciting thing to hear because I think what it says to me is this person is on the start of a journey of something really beautiful, of owning their feelings. And there are amazing things that happen for us when we start to do that. And I think what I really like about anger is it can really bring back that energy for people. It definitely did for me, that we don't have when we push it down. Like anger helps us like take action. It helps us get stuff done, be passionate, stand up for what we believe in. And that's a big part of the project for me, of being able to do that for women, but doing that in a safe way, because it's tricky, isn't it? And I think for lots of people as well, they've had, I've been in forensic services. I know what it's like when people have a very, really conflicting relationship with anger. Say, for example, when they've shown their own anger and it hasn't gone very well and they've ended up getting aggressive, or they've seen a lot of people get angry around them and that's led to horrible things happening, like people getting hurt. So for me, being able to offer a safe environment and a safe way to process connecting with that feeling and using that energy is really cool. And I think it's so important for women. But it's easy to, it's pacing that as well, because I guess depending on how long someone's been holding down those feelings, if they just start all of a sudden connecting with them, they can end up getting completely overwhelmed, right? I know you know this, Georgia. So starting to do it in a paced way is so important. And that's really difficult. And for me, I think that starts with the person starting to really get to know their body. And it's that window of tolerance thing, isn't it? And knowing when they've gone a bit too far, bringing it back down. This is what, for me, is so cool and powerful about the trauma-informed martial arts, because it's a way to help people build that relationship back up with their bodies again, that they've just lost through losing themselves. And I really truly believe in that thing of, find your body, find yourself.
Yes, so much yes. And I think like when I was so new to this work, I like always cringe at how like I learned a lot by working with clients, right? I didn't do a course to start with, so I started working with clients pretty early in one-on-one and in group capacities. And really early on, clients would say like, I'm here because I want to work on anger. And I'd be like, great. And then I'll be like, all right, we're going to hit the bag and we're going to like think about something that you're mad about, which at the surface seems like a great idea. It's a terrible idea, right? And I really nowadays liken that to being a facilitator, standing at the front of the class and yelling at everyone to push, like keep pushing, keep working, don't give up, right? Again, it's so well-meaning. We think that we're helping, but we're taking away people's autonomy. And what I have found is that if somebody comes to me and says, you know, I want to do trauma-informed kickboxing because I want to release my anger, they don't need me in the class to say, think about something that's made you angry and then bring it up, because it's there, like it's bubbling away. And depending on what's happened, you know, during that day, whether it's related to work or family or something that's happened, a lot of times people will come in and they'll bring that in themselves, but they don't actually need me to stir it up any more than it already is. It's just going to come forward. And by the end of the class, they'll say, I really needed to hit something today. I was really angry and I'm glad that I got to do that. But that's independent of me articulating around the anger, me adding words to that. All they need to do is be in a space where they can move and they're allowed to move. And I think that is so, like, we just feel like as facilitators, like we have to be guiding everything and like, you know, giving all the instructions and like that's why we're getting paid to be there and stuff. But actually you're just like holding space. And as you were talking, like that really solidified it for me, is like it is that distinction between, again, like yelling at someone to push themselves and just letting them push themselves however much they want to, and telling someone to get mad or just letting them experience their anger.
But that is, I can really relate to that from when I did my classes to train for the charity fight, because it was that was how you'd get fired up, is kind of what we'd call it. They'd say, think about someone that's really made you feel mad, or, you know, come on, like get angry. And, you know, I guess it kind of made sense and it was functional kind of in that context, because it was really difficult for me to hit people because I sit and listen to people and care for people all day. It was really difficult at the beginning. I soon got over that and enjoyed it. But that it's really different, isn't it? And yeah, particularly when there's so much in the body, working with that carefully, but it's not perfect. And I guess that for me, I've had to think about owning that too. And it's felt better to say to people, because I think I heard someone say it on the Shape Your Life project. I think it was someone that you interviewed, because Kathy on your podcast, I really liked that one. I listened to that. And she was saying that she says to people, you know, you will get triggered. Mm-hmm. This will happen. And I think it's right. I mean, that makes sense. And it's being honest, isn't it? You know, this is going to happen. You're going to confront difficult feelings in your body. This is going to be a bit scary at times, but we have got the tools and we're set up in here to help you with that, which is the difference.
Yes. And that was like 8 episodes into this podcast or something like that. So it was very fresh for me. And I was like, how do I make sure nobody gets triggered in my class? Because to me, that was like the number one priority, is no one gets triggered ever. And that's where she said, you know, like you could get triggered on the subway, you could get triggered walking the street. Better that you get triggered here, where you're going to be surrounded by people who are going to hold space for you, than in public where people are just not going to be able to help you, you know. And I think that again comes back to what we were talking about before, about you do need to be ready as a facilitator to hold space for that, right? It's not your job to create a space where people are wrapped in cotton wool and that nothing bad ever happens. Although, like I say to my clients, it is quite rare when you're working invitationally and you're inviting people to try things rather than telling them what to do, that they will become overwhelmed because they know they can opt out before it becomes too much. But we're not just trying to make sure no one gets triggered ever, because I think that then goes too far the other way. And yeah, it's an interesting dance. And it's kind of like we said before about how do you address the energy in the room? How do you pull it up and down? You get better at being able to feel into it. And I think that sometimes, you know, we couldn't be embodied practitioners without saying, like, just see what feels right with introducing anger. Just see what feels right, you know, or if it just feels right to you, then it's probably okay and you don't have to add words all the time. That's kind of my long-winded way of saying, like, I don't feel like I have the perfect solution to that, because sometimes when people ask me, like, I'm here to try and find a way to like release my anger. Am I going to be able to do that here? I even still feel a bit like uncomfortable with that question. And I wonder sometimes how much of that is my socialization, how much of that is just like my fear around being able to hold that container, around making sure that, particularly if we're doing partner work, that there's not a mismatch in terms of people's expectations for releasing anger. But all of these things with working in groups, but I mean that's what keeps it fun and interesting, I suppose.
and we've got to own our anxiety, haven't we? We've got to own which is like you said, talking about that, because we are part of the process. We've got to think about how those things are making us feel, so we can think about how we meet our needs in the class as well, so we can be present and deal with the energy in the room. And our needs are just as important, and it's so helpful for us to be modeling that too, right? For the people that we work with. And you said something else, Georgia, that I was going to speak to. You said something really, really interesting. I can't remember, but I'm just been really excited to kind of do this podcast with you, and it's just felt lovely to be able to talk about. I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever, but it's so exciting, and I think that there's so many opportunities, and I feel like it's going to grow. I think going back to what you're saying about trauma-informed kind of environments, it's really catching on, isn't it? Trauma-informed gyms, stuff like that. And I know that I think you guys have opened a gym.
We're getting close.
You're getting close. Well, and that's really exciting, because I think it has so much to offer. And I think with the NHS, at least here with the state that it's in, we need to be thinking creatively about how else can we support people. I've always been a big believer in, well, why aren't we investing more proactively in supporting people's mental health? Yes. Why are we being reactive? Why aren't we, thinking about initiatives like this and supporting people to live well so that they can meet their needs, rather than just getting to a point where they've deteriorated so much and in a bit of a hole. It just doesn't make sense.
Yes. And I feel like we just went almost full circle back to looking after yourself as a facilitator. And I mean, my undertone through why don't we look after people while they're well instead of waiting till they get sick is, like we're talking about before, as unfortunately capitalism is still alive and well.
Yeah.
And we could literally talk about this for hours, but we're basically out of time. So if anyone has any particular questions or things that you'd like us to dive deeper into, I'm super open to that. You can leave a comment on YouTube or message me on Instagram, or I think you can comment on Spotify even now.
Yeah, you can.
So let us know if there's anything else that you would like us to speak more to. But Georgina, how can people catch up with you online?
So, I mean, I've excitedly bought a website domain, but I haven't gone live yet. Just figuring out how to build the website. Going to have some fun with that. And it will mainly be Instagram. So it's warrior_women, but the E is a 3. That's probably the main way at the moment.
Perfect.
Post all the updates on there. So look forward to hearing from anyone if they want to find out a bit more.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to that in the show notes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for all of your support, Georgia. You're an absolute diamond.
It's my pleasure always.
Thank you for being part of the club. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch, please refer to the information in the show notes. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider leaving us a review or subscribing on whichever platforms you use to listen or watch the podcast. The Conscious Combat Club acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands in which we work, live, and play. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. We'd like to say thank you to Nari for the beautiful song Shape Me, heard at the beginning and end of every episode.
Nobody shapes me.
If you'd like to connect with Nari, you can find her on Instagram at NariTheSaga.
Don't gotta tell you what my name is, I don't gotta explain it. Walk in the room, hear a boom erupting like I'm famous. I'm here shedding shells, I'm shameless. I fear nothing, no complacence. Walked too many tight ropes with no hope, so I became this poster they hold over all the heads of trauma holders. You don't need to know my history, I move boulders. Atlas shrugged, cause I lifted the weight up off his shoulders. No pretense of defense, move first like chess soldiers. This goes deeper than empowerment, cause I'm the one that power it. Physical meets mental, challenge me to keep devouring. If I can't change the scenery, at least I change perspectives. No longer isolated, but elevated and selective. Darkest places become beautiful spaces. This is where rage meets patience, meets power meets gracious. Meets, we're so glad you came, and the feeling is contagious. When you the walking impact of intended bad intentions. When you the manifesting of collecting all they tensions. You the soul and body, hold it all and still remember. But I'm a work in progress, testament to all contenders. Forgot what it was like to have control over self. Forgot what it was like to be the one in charge. Forgot in my reflection I could see all my wealth. Forgot that with my bare hands I break all these bars, barriers and obstacles. They can't cage me, they can't chronicle all my experiences and reduce them to appearances. When I was truly beaten, gave myself clearances to fall down, mess up, and get myself back up. I'm not looking for clovers cause I don't believe in luck. Damn, you were badass, I heard them say it clearly. Why thank you very much, I know now I'm not weary of what's next for me. Cause I expect to see growth like I was planted, watered, fed, and bloomed to be. The positivity and accountability, knowing they won't step if I'm the agent of my agency. I think I found my voice again, huh? I think I found my voice again, huh? I'm not sorry, you're the end where I begin. Boundaries, I know them well, take a breath and meditate. Who is she? I know her well, now I get to open gates. 1, 2, 1, 2, I don't need your permission. And if you get uncomfortable, then use your intuition to know that I won't stay where respect is ever missing. And everything I do, that's me making decisions. It's truly underrated, the value of self-worth. Forgot that I was rich from the moment of my birth. A penny for my thoughts, no really, you can't afford it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it, huh?